This is Morally Sound, and I'm your host, Sean Wang. Today I'll be interviewing Mrs. Shelley Hartz and Mr. Jon Leef. Mrs. Hartz has been working at Pingry for 22 years across various departments and is currently Director of Community Service. Can you start with your name and what year you joined Pingry, the Pingry community, and when you started, what your current positions are?
My name is Shelley Hartz. I joined Pingry in 1995, November, and I am currently the Director of Community Service.
What got you interested in the community service?
I have always been interested in social action, even prior to my coming to Pingry, volunteering, being a part of the school community where my kids were, or giving back to the community that I was involved in. When I came here, I met Ms. Romanko, and she ran community service at that time, and I asked if I could be a part of it, and that's how it started. And so I've been a part of Pingry's community service since either 95 or 96.
How have you seen Pingry grow over the years? School community, honor code, how our school is involved with community service? That's
a really great question. When I first started, community service there was a support coordinator, and then there were 6 of us who each took a grade, and that grade was our responsibility. And kids handed in their hours via letters. Over the years, as that became much more cumbersome, as Pingry grew, I created with the tech team, the tech team created a database that kids could enter their hours. What's interesting about that is that there is no documentation needed. And when kids ask me about that, my answer to them is we go by honor code. I trust you enough that you're going to tell me the truth about your giving service. So I think that's an important way that the honor code comes into play in regards to service. For the past 6 years, I became the Director of Community Service, and all the other teachers that were involved stepped away, and it became my full-time position because I lobbied for that. I proposed that because I felt it was part of our mission statement. If we were going to talk the talk, we needed to walk the walk. In addition, students were becoming more involved. The job was really taking on a life of its own. What I do see over the last number of years is that students are very creative with how they want to be involved. They are willing to take the responsibility of being involved. The fact that there's one Director of Community Service and 800 kids means that I can't run every program.
Right.
But I'm happy to support those students that come in with an idea or a suggestion, or how do I get involved? And given that sense of independence and freedom, I find that the students really pick up the gauntlet and then take over, and that's wonderful. As well as faculty members who have gotten involved and now run after-school programs like ECLC, like the Buddy program, and get other kids involved. So I think that the program has continued to grow. Where I'd like to see it move to, which would certainly incorporate our mission statement and the honor code, is understanding the why behind the need. So if you give a can to the food bank, why are you giving that can?
Right.
and then continuing with those questions. And that brings into play the idea of both service learning as well as social justice, of understanding that that the need is just representative of a larger social issue that needs to be addressed.
Do you think there's any programs that do that right now, where you can tie social justice with service learning?
Here at Pingry or outside of Pingry?
Both.
Here at Pingry, I think yes. Certainly the service learning class I teach to the sixth graders. I think the environmental classes that we teach in conjunction with the outdoor club are certainly incorporating stewardship, sustainability, social justice. I think many of the trips that we run now focus on that kind of issue, if not specifically what you think of, I don't mean you personally, what people think of as community service, the fact that we're taking trips to discuss issues of social justice in a community that we're in. That, to me, is where community service is going to, as schools begin to grapple with the issues that are confronting young students who are going to eventually be leaders in this country.
What are some of your favorite Pingry community service events to host?
I would say probably my most favorite is the intergenerational prom, because it's just a lot of fun.
It is very fun.
I think I'm proud of Rufus Gunther Day. In the past, we did not go off campus. In the past, we only did community service for an hour and a half because taking into consideration travel. Rufus Gunther Day has evolved into a full day for all of our students, and the fact that we get over close to 1,000 people, 900 people off campus doing service in our larger community all on one day. I am proud of the support, the enthusiasm, and the hard work that everybody puts in that day, and I think it makes a difference.
Going back to the online records for when students punch in their service hours, are there any documentations or reflections that students send you that stand out to you?
Yes. I mean, I read through every reflection that comes in. Some are 2 sentences, some are long.
Yeah.
I think what is most impactful on me is when the student talks about what they got from the service versus what they gave, how it affected them, what they learned, what they realized, how they will continue to do this. Those are the kinds of reflections that I like to see from students. It was nice to help somebody. And yes, it is nice to help somebody. But, when a student writes, I recognize the difficulties that exist in a community when they don't have good schools, or however they're going to word it.
How do you balance, in the Pingry community, the words excellence and honor?
How do I balance that? I think that it's interesting. I was thinking about this before we started. When I first came here, I had a real hard time with the honor code. My kids did not go here. I worked part-time. This was sometimes a difficult community to be in.
Right.
And I believe that an honorable person doesn't need an honor code, that it comes from within. But after 21 years, what I believe the honor code is, it's like a speed bump. You don't need it to slow down, but sometimes it's there to remind you that you need to slow down. That's what I view as the honor code, that when I'm not sure, it's a way for me to question myself. Is this the right thing to do? And if I use that as my basis, and then look at the word excellence. It's a question of how you define excellence. And in my mind, excellence isn't being perfect, but rather giving it your best shot. Understanding that you might not succeed, but it's not so much the success, but rather the risk you were willing to take.
Where do you see the future of the Pingry community going, and with relation to the Honor Code? You've mentioned community service and how you want to see a direction towards a certain type of program.
I think for me, as a teacher, as director of community service, as a mom, as a human being, I always feel that the students that come through Pingry, because of just the nature of Pingry and the connections and the network, you're the next generation of leaders. And I think what makes a good leader is constantly questioning. Is this the right thing to do? What could be a better way to do this? How do I incorporate the ethical and moral questions that may result from this decision? I think that is, in my mind, where the Honor Code works best. And that's how the Honor Code should be, I was going to say taught, but that's where I'd like to see the Honor Code go. While I understand the importance of not plagiarizing, not cheating, holding people accountable, I think that the Honor Code has a much more far-reaching commitment. And having sat on some honor board hearings, I find them extremely thought-provoking. But because they're very small,
Right.
they don't happen all that much, that ability to think about what's right, either what's right or what's right or wrong, doesn't really come to our community very often in real examples. Not that I'm looking that we put everybody who made an
Right.
Honor Code violation up on the stage and we do it, but for me personally, I walk away from those hearings being provoked to think deeply about what I think is right. And that is what I think the beauty of the Honor Code is. I'm not sure we do enough of that, whatever that is, with our students with the Honor Code. The Honor Code usually comes up when there's a problem.
Right.
I think the Honor Code should come up every day. I think the Honor Code should be talked about in governance, in current events, in reading, in literature. What does this story say about our Honor Code? What does this issue in history say about, what does our Honor Code say about that? I can't say we don't do that because I'm not in any classes.
Right.
But I think that would be a question to ask teachers and students. I just think it should come up more than it does.
Yeah. All right, Mrs. Hartz, we are just about out of time. Do you have any final stories or pieces of advice you'd like to give it to anyone listening?
I'm not an advice giver. Well, I am. I like to tell everybody what I think. I have, having said what I said in the beginning, that I didn't believe the honor, that honorable people. My time here at Pingry, I know how important the Honor Code is when used in the way that it was written and when used to encourage our faculty and our students to think beyond themselves about what honor means. That's it.
All right. Well, thank you again, Mrs.
Thank
Hartz.
you.
Mrs. Shelley Hartz, Director of Community Service here at Pingry. Mrs. Hartz, thank you again.
You're welcome, Sean. Thank you for taking the time and asking me the questions.
Thank you to Mrs. Hartz for interviewing with me. Next is Mr. Leef. He's a Pingry parent and assistant to the headmaster. He's entering his final year working at Pingry. Could you start with your name and your positions at Pingry?
Sure. My name's Jon Leef. I'm the assistant headmaster on the Basking Ridge campus, and I teach math in the high school, junior year pre-calculus. I'm an assistant football coach, and I'm an advisor of a group of 11th graders.
What's it been like working as the assistant to the headmaster?
Well, the assistant headmaster is kind of an interesting role on this campus. It existed many years ago, and then was reintroduced back in, I guess it was 2007. But it's a great role in that it impacts grades 6 through 12. I still get to work very closely with students, but also work closely with the adults on this campus as well. So it's a lot of fun. And some of the responsibilities are less defined than others. And in some ways, as the assistant headmaster, part of your role is to give good counsel and be a sounding board to the headmaster in addition to the formal duties.
How do you see the honor code day to day as assistant headmaster, as a math teacher, an advisor, or as a coach?
Pingry is the first school that I've been associated with that has had an honor code. And it has been a fascinating experience to experience it and work within it. What I learned very quickly is that the key to its success is keeping it in the dialogue on a day-to-day basis. When something happens and there's some kind of honor code issue out there, everybody will talk about it, right? Mm-hmm. It's kind of like rubbernecking on the highway.
Yeah.
It happens. And yet, and quite honestly, I think at those times, sometimes that appeals to the most basic human characteristics, right? But when you talk about issues of honor and the honor code on a routine basis on an average Tuesday of November, it's meaningful because that's really ultimately why mandatory schooling exists, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. How have you seen the honor code and or Pingry changing over the years?
I think related to my first answer about the honor code, I think there's a certain ebb and flow in terms of student ownership and that's critical, that the students feel ownership about the honor code. And I think when I first arrived, I think that dedication to the day-to-day conversation was not as strong. And I think we suffered for that. And so I like to believe that through some great efforts, many of which were inspired by students, we've done a really nice job of keeping it in the day-to-day conversation and strengthening folks' awareness and commitment, and therefore, setting the level of expectation pretty high.
Do you ever feel that the honor code falls short?
Well, I think there are folks in the community that sometimes react to a less than honorable situation, and their immediate reaction is, how could that happen? We have an honor code. And having an honor code doesn't mean you've got a perfect community, right? And it doesn't mean that we're perfect individuals. But it means we're willing to have the difficult conversation when it needs to be had. And so, I think we have been vigilant, and I think we have been true to the code in that willingness to have the difficult conversation. Schools like ours, at times, feel like they're fighting against cultural norms and maybe the inertia that is, quote, out there.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge. That's a challenge. And I think there are aspects of that are true.
Mm-hmm. Can you think of any particular moments where the honor code has been tested?
Sure. I think in my time here, I guess it depends on your definition of tested.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I guess it means so I guess I would ask you to clarify.
Sure.
When you say the honor code being tested, what are you getting at with the question?
I've interpreted it as the honor code in which, students losing their way. Sometimes, or they'll forget what the honor code stands for to them, and they may go against the grain. My initial example would be something like this past election, where students would forego, let's say, respectful and reasonable debate and kind of resort to name calling.
Got it.
Or just...
Yeah, that's interesting. And one could argue that was an example of the greater community and the greater culture, right, kind of influencing what we would hope our better tendencies should be in this community.
Right.
And, it's funny you mention that, Sean. I think overall, this community did pretty well during that time. And yet I would acknowledge there was a tension associated with that. I'll give one that's not popular currently, and maybe folks have talked about it with you and maybe they haven't. Let's talk about last week's senior prank.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I think that is less than honorable behavior. And I think that feeds into the stereotypes of entitlement that the outside world has when they view a place like Pingry. And I know I'm talking about more than one thing. I am talking about a sense of entitlement, which may or may not be directly related to the honor code. But, I think choices that are made that day are less than honorable.
Was there anything in particular with that day or with some of the pranks, I suppose?
I guess one man's vandalism is another man's prank.
Right.
And And I'm not here to be the moral majority or judge individual instances that occur in that day. But again, that sense of entitlement and that sense of making decisions for the entire community are the parts that I feel are not honorable.
Do you see ways in which we can mitigate that sense of entitlement, or lessons that we could provide to the community that could try to change our perspective?
Oh, yeah. I think it's probably for greater minds than the two of ours to come up with what to do specifically about senior prank tradition. But in general, and I think more importantly, maintaining those dialogues, maintaining the tradition of student speakers at assemblies, faculty speakers at assemblies, celebrating when things go right, are important. And I do think they tend to show the way. As adults and teachers in the community, we are the constants, right? We have a great bunch of students who leave us every year, and a great bunch of students who join us every year. But the teachers who are here for a few years need to model great, honorable behavior, but also model going above and beyond what we would say is appropriate behavior. Right? You can navigate through a school community like Pingry without ever getting in trouble.
Right.
But perhaps not necessarily modeling honorable behavior in such a way that you inspire others. Wouldn't it be nice if folks hoped to perhaps inspire honor in others more often?
Mm-hmm. Are there any faculty or student speakers, or even the John Hanley Lecture Series speakers, who you think really modeled or inspired you?
Oh, so many. There are many moments. I remember Mr. Grant stepping up to the microphone and telling the community one year about one of his cross-country runners who had just been passed by a competitor who was then going to take a wrong turn on the course. And our runner, who had just been passed, called out to the young lady who had passed her and told her she was going the wrong way. That was a small story that just took a couple minutes, but the crowd was pretty transfixed by that story. So there have been a lot of student speakers, a lot of faculty speakers. A fun speaker was when John Quinones came and talked about his series "What Would You Do?" and the fact that Mr. Winston and Mr. Nazario had both been on that program, caught by secret camera for the series. That was a lot of fun, and a very engaging way for kids, to wrestle with some ethical dilemma.
How do you balance the ideas that Pingry, exemplifies, that is excellence and honor?
Yeah, I've heard colleagues and other adults in the community talk about the tendency for us perhaps to stress the excellence piece of that over the honor piece. And I could see why. It might be an interesting exercise to look back on the celebratory news items posted on our website and see how many celebrate excellence and how many celebrate honor. I appreciate the folks who caution us to be mindful of that balance. I do think they have a point.
What's it like being both a faculty member and also a Pingry parent?
That's challenging sometimes for me personally. When the parents do things socially, and I'm part of those events, right? I'm never off the clock. And that's something that faculty members all have experience with, going to watch a game or going to the spring fundraiser or anything like that. But as an administrator of the school and as a parent, it can be a tough balance. That being said, it's not any tougher than the balance that my kids have had to strike.
Right.
Because I think I have all the respect for them, because I think being the son of the headmaster is probably tougher on them than wearing both those hats.
Right.
I can choose to not attend some things or make an early exit or circulate through the crowd as I feel I need to. But their program is scheduled here at the Pingry School.
Right.
And my older son walked in your shoes. And I think members of the honor board and the leadership of the honor board, I think those kids are presiding over maybe the most difficult charge a high school kid could have from a leadership perspective. It's not easy. And there were times where he may have disagreed ultimately with the administration on certain issues. And then we're sitting down to dinner together. So that's reality. I think we all have those challenges at one level or another.
Can you talk a little bit about how your two sons have developed through Pingry and maybe how they've interacted with the honor code?
Yeah, I think they've both had very different experiences. I will say that the connections they've made with the adults in the community have been extremely meaningful to them. And kind of coming full circle to what we talked about before in terms of setting an example and the adult setting an example. Both of my sons in their careers have paid very close attention to the example that has been set for them by older students and by faculty and staff. And so their sense of right and wrong, their ability to smell out hypocrisy is pretty well developed.
Yeah.
And that'll serve him well in life, I think.
What are some of the big takeaways you've had over your years working at Pingry?
Well, one of the bigger ones is the quote that's on the top of my whiteboard that you read when you walked in here. Relationships before tasks. And that was that quote is attributed to a fellow by the name of Lee Levison, who I met once. He knew the headmaster at my last school. He is the headmaster at collegiate school in New York. And he actually uttered that remark to a colleague of mine who brought it back to me. And I liked it because I think I've been in the absolute most optimistic profession that I could ever be in education.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, being a leader at a place like Pingry is sometimes like steering an aircraft carrier. And so if you don't earn the trust and respect of the people that you're on the front lines with every day, it's pretty tough to lead. And I think the way you earn that trust and respect is you develop relationships, you value relationships, you pay attention to your relationships every day. And so that's that professionally, I think to some degree I'm hardwired to do that, but that life lesson was certainly reinforced here at Pingry.
Do you have any stories related to your challenges between building relationships or trust and becoming the member you are today?
Oh, a lot of them. But most of them I wouldn't be able to share on this podcast. But, no, when you ask colleagues to go above and beyond the great work that they already do, you better, number one, have a good reason for them to do that. And number two, they better trust you that it's going to be worth it and that it's valuable. And there are certainly many examples of teachers that you've worked with and that the adults you know in the community who have gone above and beyond, whether it's changing a master schedule or doing some committee work that's valuable or helping a student that has fallen way behind because of a health issue or, all of those things. All of those things don't happen unless people are willing to go above and beyond.
In your final year working at Pingry, correct?
Yeah.
What do you hope to leave as your legacy or important marks, or what you hope to be remembered as?
It's a great question. I think first off you can't necessarily control what people are going to remember or recall years from now. I think by the time you're leaving, it's probably too late to contemplate that, right? But the way you go about your business on a day-to-day basis is the most important legacy that you can hope to leave. When you transition because of a graduation or a new role or a new chapter in your life, the way you went about your job every day, hopefully remaining true to yourself, hopefully growing along the way, acknowledging mistakes, keeping your eye on the next challenge coming down, the road, putting in an honest effort, again, valuing and fostering relationships. If you do that on a daily basis, the legacy piece and the memory piece, that'll take care of itself.
Mm-hmm. Would you mind sharing any exciting plans you have for the future?
My plans for the future are not determined just yet.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm excited to stay in education. I've always been a teacher and coach at heart. As I mentioned before, I think this is the most optimistic, wonderful profession there is. And so wherever the path goes specifically, I hope and expect to make a positive impact on the folks,
mm-hmm.
With whom I cross paths. So that's the number one goal. It always has been, and it always will be.
Well, Mr. Leef, thank you for taking the time to speak with me. Do you have any last things you'd like to tell anyone who might be listening? Stories or advice?
No, it has been a privilege to be part of this community. It's I guess if you asked me for one piece of advice, it would probably be to appreciate the folks in the community. Take some time to do that. Don't forget the blessings that come along with being a community like this. And getting back to what we had talked about before, remember the goal of good character,
mm-hmm.
Being hand in hand with all those excellent things that we're pursuing here.
Yeah. All right. Well, Mr. Leef, thank you again. Mr. Jon Leef, assistant to the headmaster, math teacher, and coach. Thank you again.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you to Mr. Leef for taking the time to speak with me, and I wish him the best in his future years. For future episodes, please follow my updates on the Pingry Honor Board Facebook page or on the Morley Sound YouTube playlist.